I've got a reputation now, a bad one.
The environment for trans people, in particular in the UK at present, is abhorrent. And the hatred perpetuated by certain people in this room should be a damning indictment on them.
I was sat in my room and I could hear protests outside. The whole city just felt on edge throughout the whole thing.
Being in the same room as Dr. Stock and hearing her say the things she says, when I know the meaning she has behind them, it just feels aggressive against me, so I decided to stay away.
I am already thought of as transphobic. You know, there's nothing I could do for these people to repair that now. There's nothing I could say that would change it.
Dr. Stock, those she enables, and those who enable her, disgust me, and they should disgust this house.
It's hard for me to say why a certain issue becomes so heated. Hearing from these voices has to be positive.
Your generation is terrified of causing offence. And I'm sure you know that because I'm sure you sometimes have rebellious thoughts that you think would offend people. And I think heretical thoughts need to be discussed. So that is why I commend the motion to you.
For the past few years, a toxic culture war has been raging across the United Kingdom.
The level of toxicity now and misunderstanding that's out there is just huge. We didn't have to be here, but we are.
Opinions on the meaning of sex and gender have become so polarised that many people are afraid to speak out.
Someone like me who chooses to engage with others is seen and has been called, a quisling, a saboteur, a betrayer, platforming of hate and a danger to their own community and not making people feel safe.
I think about the language that is used about us. We're the trans debate, the trans issue, and I think, how have we got to that point? It's dehumanizing. We're a debate, we're an issue, we're a question. We're not human beings with lives and loves and feelings. We're a problem to be solved.
Just by looking at me, because it's a fixed thing. It was fixed before I was born, and I'll be female, hint, I've outed myself, until I die.
Battle lines have been drawn, and any constructive dialogue seems to have become impossible.
What's the fundamental thing we're arguing about is whether a trans woman is a woman or whether a trans man is a man. That's the most controversial thing that I could have ever said, is that I don't think trans women are women.
Being recognised in the sex you consider appropriate to your gender identity has been legally possible for trans people since gender recognition certificates were introduced in 2004. But in 2018, discussions began to reform the process.
A person wanting to legally change his or her gender in the UK faces a number of steps, including a medical diagnosis, living in the chosen gender for at least 2 years, and paying a fee. But campaigners say the process is far too complicated, and a decision will be made soon on any proposed changes in England and Wales.
Kathleen Stock was amongst those who submitted her views.
I knew that there were people saying self-ID is a brilliant idea, and getting loads of adulation for it. But I couldn't see anyone arguing the opposite case.
Kathleen took the decision to clarify her position publicly.
There is a particular worry about the extent to which trans women are coming to dominate political landscapes in the UK, formerly reserved for women, and the extent to which trans women can properly represent women's experiences and concerns, given very different social histories and biologies. Saying that trans women are women, or are not, is not like saying that grass is green or rain is wet.
I knew that in writing that blog post and hitting send and putting it on Twitter, I do think of that moment as sort of like a sliding doors moment.
Almost immediately, students began to protest against what many of them considered to be her transphobic views.
Clearly there were some very anxious students at Sussex who really believed I wanted to hurt them. And it didn't matter how many times I tried to explain that that's not what was going on at all. They believed it.
Demand grew for Kathleen to leave the position she had held for 18 years.
The world seemed to have gone absolutely crazy. I think, well, this is how we got into this mess in the first place, by not being able to say what we think.
This campus does not accept your transphobia!
There's times when sex, biological sex category, which does not change no matter what you do to yourself, is the most salient fact.
Stop out! Stop out! Stop.
This isn't about hating trans people. I think trans people should be protected under the Equality Act. It's an argument about categories, but it's not about individual trans people.
Being trans is a form of eccentricism because you're outside of the normal curve, of the normal distribution of how most people present or behave or appear. I just think that gender dysphoria comes to your mind either at an early age or around puberty, when your body is facing yet another change and you think, actually, you know what? This is stressing me and it doesn't feel right. I sought out every possible method of avoiding changing my body. My own psychiatrists called me the reluctant transsexual. I went on workshops, I went to therapy, I went through conversion therapy. I tried everything to avoid changing my body, but the dysphoria in my head was so intense and lasted 30 years before I finally kind of gave in and actually thought, you know what, I've tried everything else. The last thing I can do actually is change my body. So belatedly I did, and it did bring instant relief. The war with myself is actually over, but now I have a war with society instead.
Katie spends a lot of her time immersed in trying to make sense of the current controversy.
I believe that we should always start by reading that which is we disagree with, because that helps us to get outside our echo chambers and our bubbles. And so I deliberately read every book that's published that is counter the trans position. There are degrees to which both the extremes of gender-critical opposition to trans and some extremes of trans rights activism have moved into this fundamentalist, polarised, extremist, radicalised position. The most extreme will close ranks and shun and ostracise both the moderate gender criticals and the moderate trans. And yet it's the moderates in both camps where it is the only hope, really, for social coexistence. And yet you end up being, for a while anyway, shunned by both sides.
Rumours, lies, distortions proliferate so quickly, and I could see it happening. People were, she hates trans people. I felt like I was increasingly under siege. When you're in it, there's this incredulity, like, what's happening now? What do I have to defend now? I'm sure a lot of people thought, well, she's coping, she keeps going, if she didn't like it, she'd stop.
Kathleen Stock, a philosophy professor who was criticised for her views on gender identity, has resigned from the University of Sussex. Kathleen Stock, who is a respected philosophy professor, has stepped down from her position after weeks of protests by students who have accused her of...
I feel relaxed about what happened, and I think there's ways in which you can say I've gained a new life, which I enjoy through it. And you think about the reason for which I have, lost my career, because I said there were two sexes. Biology made it that way. We didn't make the rules, but it's helpful to have terms that describe them.
After leaving Sussex, Kathleen became more involved with the gender critical movement. Alongside Julie Bindle, a veteran campaigner for women's rights.
Left-wing feminists like myself, those of us that have fought against male violence for decades, are the ones saying, no, trans women are not women. We will treat trans women with dignity and with respect. We, of course, accept that they wish to live as the opposite sex, but they can't have the word woman. It's taken. It belongs to us. That is not up for negotiation. That is where the battle line is for me. That is my line in the sand.
I don't question women's right to be. I don't question anybody's right to be. The transgender community has, on the whole, recognised its position at the bottom of the pile, and that we've been having to negotiate and talk to everybody along the way. In the 70s and the 80s, we were the dirt that people wiped off their shoes. The 90s was when we organised and we created Press for Change, and gradually we won those core basic rights. Whatever we got, we'd had to fight for through the courts. We were given absolutely nothing for free. We did everything that was needed to try and get people to understand that we were just like them, that we wanted ordinary lives, really.
Hello, good morning. Dr. Stephen Whittle was born a girl. He says that that was just an accident of nature. So how does society treat people who have to change their gender? Stephen, when did you first realise that you were, as it were, in the wrong body?
At a very, very early age.
Did you feel traumatised or
totally
damaged?
I spent my teenage years thinking, how quickly could I die?
Really?
I thought I really, really could not bear the idea of working for 40 years as a woman, of supposedly thinking about getting married and having kids as a woman. So it seemed a monumental nightmare, all those things. And I just think, several times I tried to kill myself as a teenager.
We outed ourselves very visibly in the 90s at a time when nobody was out. But we went out there and we said, this is us, and we're speaking on television, on radio, in meetings. We are the people with the horns and the tail, but actually, by doing that, we did develop that sense of resilience. We are not up for debate. We're here. And nobody's going to be able to turn back this tide and pretend we don't exist.
Being transgender, just like sex, is a protected characteristic under UK equalities law. But the attention directed at self-identification has led to anxiety in the community.
It's exhausting. All of these kind of fake debates, all this fear and moral panic and fake concern is whipped up just because there's some people that just don't get what it means to be trans, Trans men are men, trans women are women, non-binary identities are non-binary. If you're having a problem with that, then I think you've got to really question yourself. Do you feel that your views might be considered hatred?
We're going to do something a little bit different now and talk to someone who's been at the centre of, I was going to say a media storm. It's much more than a media storm. It's a storm in the world of academia. It's a storm in the world of gender identity.
Since leaving Sussex, Kathleen has expressed her views openly in the mainstream media.
Kathleen, I ask you a question. Am I male or female?
I don't know you, Farah, so how would I know?
I'm a trans woman.
Well, then I'm afraid you're genetically male. Yes.
Exactly, and this is
it's a fact, it's your biology, it was determined at conception. I'm sorry.
Person, but you don't accept trans women.
No, I don't accept you change sex, I'm afraid. I don't think it's scientifically possible. I think transness is a way of being what you always were. You're still a man, you're still a woman. I'm a woman. I'm a woman if I cut my breasts off. I'm a woman if I take testosterone for 20 years. I'm a woman if I get facial hair, if I have a synthetic penis put in. You know, I'm just a. There are many different ways to be a woman. There are many different ways to be a man. I know trans people for whom that works. You know, they don't have to say, "I'm a woman." You know, a trans woman does not have to insist to herself that she is a woman.
The term transgender includes a wide range of identities, not only those who have physically transitioned.
There are plenty of trans people out there who can actually acknowledge biological reality and still say they are a woman or still say they're trans. Then, you know, but there are internal fights within the spectrum of trans. Why are we so obsessed around genitals and bodily organs and all the rest of it? At the end of the day, if someone's behaving well in society, you know, their body parts don't matter. But yes, at the end of the day as well, also, body parts are often what we can use to oppress each other and to commit crime. But it's, again, I've said this before, but it's the crimes that need to be monitored in that sense, not the genital policing.
In the year following Sarah Everard's murder, despite the public outcry, 125 women were killed by men. Male violence, and the question of who might or might not pose a threat to women, has become one of the central issues for both sides.
I got involved in this debate because of my work on male violence against women and girls. I volunteered in a domestic violence refuge, on a rape crisis line. Now, we set up those spaces not because all men are sexual predators, but because enough are to mean that women can't tell who is and who isn't going to harm them. And then along came some trans-identified males, trans women, who said, we have the right to be in those spaces. Now, we'd set them up in order to keep men out. And that means all men.
How do we operationalise safeguarding on a massive scale when we're dealing with, there's no one at the door saying you can come in, not you, so we've got to have social norms. Which ones do we have? Do we have ones that say if you look like a hulking great bloke you can go into the ladies? I would say no, because that allows any hulking great bloke to go into the ladies.
You've got this tiny demographic of trans people, including trans women. I don't see how trans women having access to women-only toilets would somehow curtail women's rights as well. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are cis women. They're all trans allies. They all support trans rights. So it's very difficult to talk about women's rights versus trans rights.
The focus on trans women accessing women's spaces has become one of the most contentious issues.
Hello, guys. Come on then. Come on. It's okay to recognise that you can be perceived as dangerous. It doesn't mean that you are. And I remember being in a women's toilet very recently with a female friend, and we'd gone in there. We thought we were the only people in there, so we were chatting between the walls. And while I was doing that, I suddenly realised, you know what? If someone else comes in quietly, or someone else was already in here that we didn't know about, they're going to hear a male voice. And they'll be freaked out of their skin, quite probably. So it made me actually stum up.
I was in a pub a couple of weekends ago, and there were no gender-neutral toilets. It was either men's or women's, and the place was heaving. And I had not an anxiety attack exactly, but I was a little bit worried because going into a women-only toilet, would someone confront me or so on? And in the end, I didn't go. I went home. I finished my drink, and I hugged my friend goodbye and said, I'm going home now. And I went home and I went to the toilet, and then I just stayed in for the rest of the night. Having almost this internalized, self-hate sometimes and thinking, do I have the right? Do I belong? You know, how trans am I? How woman am I? I'm not woman enough. I should just go home. I understand the anger and even the sense of paranoia about women-only spaces, who gets to come in, for example. But the way that it's got out of control, as I see it, in terms of the level of almost this blanket ban now, no trans women in our spaces.
Why is it that trans women can't see that it's about keeping men out of our spaces? And unfortunately, much as trans women may well want to rely on the fiction, they are not women, they are trans women.
The possibility that men could abuse a system of self-identification has become highly controversial.
Today, with so many men being opportunistic sex offenders against women and girls, being able to wander very casually into this identity of woman, it's a danger. We have to be alert to it.
Tensions have become heightened on both sides by cases that make the headlines, like the recent situation in Scotland, where a double rapist who transitioned from male to female was briefly housed in a women's prison before being moved after a public outcry.
There are predatory males in society, and a minority of them may also cross-dress. A minority of them may also transition, and a minority of them may also fraudulently use gender self-ID or whatever it might be. But the issue is that male perversion, male threat, male violence, and I'm totally anti that at every single step of the way. And if some of that is the bad apples in the trans camp, then I think we should own our bad apples, but also recognise that the majority just want to get on with life.
The sad fact is that most abusive men are in people's homes, are people they know, are people they work with, or are in institutions alongside. Abusive, sexually violent men do not need to transition to live as trans women in order to be sexually violent to women and children. Sadly, that is a daily occurrence.
In England and Wales, nearly 1 in 4 women has reported being a victim of rape or sexual assault, and a woman is killed every 3 days by a man. But reliable figures indicating how many or how few attacks involve people identifying as trans are not available.
And when people say, why are you assuming that every trans woman, every trans-identified male is a sexual predator? Of course we're not. We never assumed that actual men were all sexual predators. We knew enough of them were in order to need women-only facilities. And that's why there's a danger, because of course it's far more normalised now for men to be able to just identify themselves into the category of woman and to have some legal rights to do so.
Women won't wished means women won't be silenced, and several hundred were outside the Scottish Parliament demanding to be heard.
The legal right to self-ID has been introduced in several countries, but has divided the UK. In Scotland, a controversial gender reform bill has recently been blocked by the UK government.
This idea that men would wake up in the morning and say, suddenly I'm a woman, that isn't what the Gender Recognition Act is. You still need to make a legal declaration. It's just a much less cumbersome process than it was previously. I do have friends who are trans people, and we all share one thing in common, which is a sense of distress at how this niche piece of policy making turned into this existential questioning of trans people's identities.
There is definitely a cultural shift going on in terms of how gender is understood. Younger adults are much more likely to support self-identification. Most young people will know people that don't use designated sex pronouns. They'll use words like Z, or they'll say they, them. They're familiar with people identifying as just not straight or non-binary. They don't want to be defined. These categories that were previously seen as fairly fixed by younger adults increasingly are seen as much more fluid.
Cass, Lily and William are second-year students at Cambridge University.
Many people go through life without thinking about gender at all. I know that I did not consider my gender at all until I was meeting people who had had those thought processes already.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're right. I think something about what actually is masculinity to me.
In something that ends up being, for better or worse, quite important in day-to-day life. It's just almost, I feel, nice to know that you've actively claimed your gender and that you recognise who you are more fully, in the same way that you'd want to know more about yourself in any other way.
I think new generations don't want to be boxed in to pre-existing categories. They want to define their own categories. None of us are just one thing. That's been realised for a long time. But now, newer generations are calling for that to be formally recognised, and that does seem to be happening.
I just think, for something so complicated, to then base it in someone's genitals and biological sex is just not accurate, and I think really stamps on just people that feel a completely wide range of things, and especially when there have been documents all throughout history of people that feel that there's not just men and women, there's not just this and that, and it's just, I think it just is something that is infinitely more complex.
It's something that you can discover about yourself. You don't have to associate it with it particularly. You don't have to feel that you need to act on it, but you also can if you need to.
It can really be quite difficult to live in a world that not only doesn't understand you, but is specifically being hampered from understanding you, I guess is the way to put it. In saying, oh, there are only two genders, we want a debate about gender and sex, can be damaging. And then especially some of the more extreme comments that are just downright offensive completely in themselves can cause worse things than that.
I feel like I've put a lot of effort in my life into being able to just kind of slip under the radar and not be particularly noticeable or objectionable. But I feel so threatened by the way the public sphere treats these issues at the moment that I don't feel like I have an option but to start to be vocal. And I find that concerning and personally quite upsetting.
Tonight, around 400 people will be attending a debate at the Cambridge Union, where Kathleen has been asked to speak. It has attracted a considerable amount of attention.
If I'm going into a venue where I know there's going to be hostility, or I suspect there will be, it's incredibly nerve-wracking. I have to really steel myself to walk in there.
Kathleen has been invited to support the proposition that there should be a right to offend. Alongside her, second-year law student Cass is arguing in support of the same motion.
This is the British Parliamentary debate. We've got 3 paper speakers on each side, so please do get involved. Debates like this are valuable when they're interactive. That's really important to note. This debate isn't a debate about trans rights or gender-critical views or anything that Kathleen Stock's done. It's a debate about the right to hold a view which is perceived as offensive. Without further ado, let's move to the first proposition speaker, Cass.
The first thing it's vital for me to do is to clarify my exact stance on this debate. The environment for trans people, in particular in the UK at present, is abhorrent, and the hatred perpetuated by certain people in this room should be a damning indictment on them. And now, it's obvious from the lineup of this debate that this discussion is unavoidable. And I suppose better to head it off at the pass. I do not believe trans rights are up for debate. And I believe the union was wrong to invite Dr. Stock and risk shifting.
It soon becomes clear that Cass is using the platform to speak out against Kathleen.
As a proud non-binary person, it is impossible to look at the state of modern media and not be miserable. Trans rights remain not up for debate. Dr. Stock, those she enables, and those who enable her disgust me, and they should disgust this House.
I could never have predicted that that was going to happen. I mean, that was a surprise to me. Maybe I feel I should have been able to see it coming, actually, but I didn't.
I think it was difficult to stand up and sort of, as some people have put it, ambush in this, in protest effectively. But I just think it's a matter where what is being said so needs to be challenged and the narrative so needs to be shifted to one that is more representative of the real story for trans people, that I think doing what I did was right. And that in a space that encourages free speech and is going to invite a speaker like that, I think that the exact rules of the debate need to come secondary to what is a social cause that needs attention and needs radical change from how it's currently portrayed.
Kathleen Stock is a philosopher and writer. She was formerly Professor of Philosophy at the University of Sussex, and she resigned in October 2021 following attacks on her by colleagues as well as a student campaign. Kathleen, you have the ears of the House.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam President, for inviting me. I'm not going to address anything that's been said about me, even though I obviously disagree with it. It's within every speaker's right to say what they like, and that's fine by me. I'm going to actually address the question, which is there a right to offend? I was looking around at all these other hostile faces and people wearing badges, you know, and like clearly since indicating to me, although we weren't talking about trans issues at all, that that's why they were there. And you could hear the drumming in the background. So it was a very like arena-like environment. That's what it felt like, and I did not enjoy it. Your generation, if most of you are undergraduates here, slightly younger than me, is terrified of causing offence. You may not admit this. It's sort of even a taboo to admit that you're terrified of causing offence, because of course you're not. You're very moral people and you'd say what you think. But I don't think that's true. I think social media has made everybody very frightened of causing offence, of saying the right thing or the wrong thing. And that, as you know, is a problem. And I'm sure you know that, because I'm sure you sometimes have rebellious thoughts that you think would offend people. And I think heretical thoughts need to be discussed. So that is why I commend the motion to you.
After leaving the chamber, Kathleen and Cass avoided each other and have not spoken since.
I was an academic. The whole point of academics was supposed to be, for a start, to say what you think, having reflected. So I already had a responsibility as an academic, but now I've got even more of a responsibility. I am already thought of as transphobic. You know, there's nothing I could do for these people to repair that now. There's nothing I could say that would change it. So I might as well just keep going, doing what I'm doing, which as far as I'm concerned is not transphobic. When I came out, I found such power. Everything about me changed, physically, emotionally. I felt so much more comfortable with myself. The way I walked changed, my clothes changed. I stopped wearing makeup overnight. I don't wear makeup at all. I felt like I was a different person. I mean, it explains why it's so personal to me. It really does explain why it's so personal. When I said it was a vocation, It didn't call me out of nowhere. It called me out of a lifelong unease I have had with womanhood, girlhood and womanhood.
Whether you buck the trend as a tomboy woman or as a lesbian butch, or myself as a trans person who doesn't do makeup, doesn't do skirts and the rest of it, but feels free to be myself. We still judge on appearance, whether it's a trans woman appearance or a cisgender woman's appearance.
I know I dress like a man, I get a haircut like a man, and sometimes people think briefly that I am a man. And I don't mind that. I know I'm a woman, and I don't think I'm a man. In a different version of me, transplanted into the future, if I'd been a teenager, I do think that this whole non-binary stuff, or, you can change your sex, you can basically become less feminine, and it's cool, surgically, would have appealed to me. My concern is that this has become such a popular narrative in the last 10 years in the culture that there are people transitioning where this is not the right story for them, and it won't ultimately be the right story for them, and then there will be irrevocable harms that they have done to themselves along the way that they can't take back. So that's one big worry.
Approximately 0.5% of the UK do identify as a gender different than their birth sex. And for them, the hurdles to be able to live in their chosen gender can be significant.
As we explore the question, we realise the limitations of the surgery that's available, and we realise we are going to have restrictions. Just as a 19-year-old, having to decide whether I was going to give up my fertility, potentially never have children or a family, was a really difficult decision at that point. But I felt I couldn't live. I couldn't carry on living, so what use was a potential parent who was going to kill themselves? That was it.
I think some people think that you decide that you're trans, you go to your doctor, you tell them that, they give you hormones, and there you are, transitioned, surgery next week. It doesn't work like that. There's actually a lot of inner turmoil and thought, when you are trying to come to that realisation of the person you are. And it's only after you've made that realisation that you then start on possibly a medical transition journey, which will take years and years. This isn't a thought on a whim for anyone. It's something that takes a lot of soul searching.
Decades.
Yeah. Right. Do you need that bit?
The recent debates around gender have left many trans people feeling overwhelmed by what they experience as prejudice. In response, some councils have declared themselves trans-inclusive.
I proposed a motion that states loudly and clearly that Norwich City Council is in support of the trans and non-binary community, that it condemns the hatred that is directed towards them.
Norwich Council unanimously approved the motion that trans men are men and trans women are women.
Oh, this looks great. Rice and vegan stuff for me, please. Even if you don't believe I'm a real man because I'm trans, they're not telling you to believe that. They're saying this council, as representatives of this city, believes that.
The authorities in Norwich have decided to address some of the questions the community have, and their fear that transphobia is on the rise.
There's certainly been an increase in the number of recorded incidents of hate crime. Now that could be because of an increase in hate crime, it could be because better reporting by the police, it could be because they are a community that feels more comfortable about reporting these things, and that's why we're here. I think that crime that goes to the notion of an individual's identity can have a profound impact, actually, and probably more so than other types of crime.
Okay, folks, can I just make a quick announcement? Sorry, I love having control of a room.
Teacher voice.
Right, so the Rights in the Justice System workshop is about to begin now, just in the room over there. So please go and tell them how it is, and they are here to listen to you and to take your concerns on board. Okay.
For some, the idea that trans women are women and trans men are men is seen as a step in the right direction, but is deeply troubling for others. As prominent gender-critical voices, Kathleen and Julie are supporters of the Scottish women's groups, who have been running a determined campaign against what they view would be an erosion of women's rights.
I'd like to welcome you both to the revolution, as I would say.
How did you all get involved in this then?
But once you are sort of say that you support women's rights, you're labelled a TERF, you're labelled transphobic, and I think that has a dehumanising effect.
I only found out about the word TERF because I was called a TERF, and I had to look it up. And obviously it's designed to misrepresent straight away because it's trans, exclusionary, radical, feminist.
In terms of male violence, the law is terrible, obviously, if men can identify as women based on the feeling. Men can take liberties. They don't need to identify as trans. They can just be there saying, I have every right to be here. What does living as a woman mean anymore?
I feel full of admiration for women who've got involved in this. I really do. I just admire them because they're all risking something. A lot of them have suffered as a result of it. And their hearts are in the right place. Their heads are in the right place. I mean, they're really admirable and brave.
I think you kind of just have to accept that you are going to lose friends by having this opinion. Yeah.
But are they even friends?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you want these people in your life?
Yeah.
Have you gained friends as well?
Yeah, I've gained Nicole.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you so much, Julie. Thank you.
I have a lot of respect for women like Kathleen. I wish that more young people would stand with her instead of letting her speak for them. The problem with free speech in my generation is that a lot of us seem to be relying on older generations to get us out of this mess, but I really do feel like unless we start having these conversations with each other and, talking about this, that this issue is never going to be resolved.
We are obsessed over this definition of sex and gender at the moment, and it's been magnified to this emotional state that is hard to back down from. And I think there are also some people on both sides are so invested in the fight that they don't want to get their claws out of the fight. And if someone offered them a solution, I think many wouldn't take it.
The lack of dialogue in this debate means that conversations between those with differing views are rare.
For the past 50 years, I think I have been engaged in seeking for equality for women in particular. I'm not hostile to trans. I'm definitely hostile to the politics of trans, which seeks to silence women's voices. They are not women.
Well, I'm dressed like a zebra because, I want to represent the fact that all this stuff in life at the moment is all black and white.
Katie and Linda are an exception and have forged an unlikely friendship.
I care about Katie as someone with whom I can have really profound discussions and arguments and we can be respectful of each other. This is a good thing. I'm a proud lesbian feminist, but I don't think it would be fair to assume that all women are. So I think we've got a politics, and indeed there's some diversity within our politics, which is probably why you and I are talking to each other, whereas some of my lesbian feminist sisters wouldn't be engaged in talking with you, and probably won't be engaged with talking with me from henceforth. But freedom of speech, freedom of expression are important, and I don't think we'd take the discussion of trans forward unless we can actually talk to each other.
I think because one side wants to take away trans people's rights, and then on the other side you've got trans people. And that's the divide as I see it. I'm going to continue living my life as it is, and so are other trans people. And even if there is hostility, there's also a knowledge that people respectful, accepting of trans people.
The notion that every human being is of equal value. If we did that, we wouldn't be having an argument about gender.
We need to kind of humanise these debates, and that's why I think we need to actually have people literally sat down in a pub having a discussion.
And I'm glad that you and I are able to argue with each other.
What we need in this debate is probably more alcohol.
Let's just all get on with our lives. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter whether you get it or not. We're just trying to live. Although it's a time for contemplation, it's also a time that I have become deeply aware, particularly this year, of what a wonderful community we have here in Norwich, supporting each other.
There is no real end in sight to the battle between sex and gender. Self-ID is on hold, for now at least, in Scotland, and everything remains on the line. For those who've been caught up in this toxic war of words, the repercussions continue.
All of a sudden, I'm not someone who's fought for lesbian liberation, women's rights, against rape, against domestic violence. I'm just an anti-trans bigot, and that hurts.
Trans women are women is not the hill I want to die on. But then you start having to get down a debate, what is a woman? And that shouldn't even be a debate that we're having. But what the debate we should be having is, how do people live their lives peacefully? How do people live their lives safely? How do people get respected and left alone, and are safe?
I actually don't even want to think about restoring my reputation. That is not something I ever think about, partly because I think, what's the point in thinking about something that's impossible? I'm really just going to carry on talking to reasonable people who treat me with respect. All I can do is just keep going, making my point over and over and over again. That's all I can do. That is all I can do.
There's support information online at channel4.com/support. And for more powerful documentaries, stream our Untold collection now.